I saw her scar by accident, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about her. Commander Mark Shannon had never expected to be swept up in something like this. When Lieutenant Commander Nilara, an alien woman of violet skin and sharp, golden eyes, walked into his life, it was supposed to be just another day on the Zeta Prime station. But when his eyes inadvertently fell on the strange geometric scar hidden beneath her uniform, he learned the truth. Nilara was hiding something far darker than a simple past, something that could cost them both their lives. Now, he had no choice but to help her, because, in the end, the scar wasn't just a mark, it was a symbol of everything she had escaped from, and everything that was about to catch up with them both. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Alien Whispers for more exciting videos. Thanks for watching. Zeta Prime Space Station was a gleaming monument to interstellar cooperation, a lattice of steel and crystal orbiting the gas giant Xerxes. Built as a joint venture between humans and Proxians, it buzzed with the hum of fusion reactors and the flicker of holographic displays. Its rotating sections mimicked gravity, while advanced life support systems sustained a fragile existence in the unforgiving vacuum. To those aboard, it was a beacon of unity in a galaxy often fractured by mistrust. Commander Mark Shannon stood in the heart of the main engineering bay, his broad shoulders hunched over a console. At 35, Mark was a seasoned engineer with a reputation for tackling the impossible. His dark hair was tousled, his green eyes sharp with focus, and a shadow of stubble lined his chiseled jaw. Known for his technical brilliance and a roguish charm that had broken more than a few hearts back on Earth, he thrived on challenges. Today, though, his patience was wearing thin. The station's propulsion system, a hybrid of human and Proxian tech, was acting up again. Despite hours of tweaks, the damn thing refused to stabilize, and with a Proxian delegation due tomorrow, Mark felt the pressure like a vice. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The hiss of the bay door broke his concentration. Lieutenant Commander Nilara stepped inside, and Mark's world tilted. Her violet skin shimmered under the bay's harsh lights, smooth as polished amethyst, and her luminous eyes, large, golden, and piercing, locked onto his with an intensity that stole his breath. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with a lithe frame that moved with predatory grace. Her long, lavender hair was tied back, and her silver-gray uniform hugged her curve in a way that was both practical and maddeningly distracting. "Commander Shannon," she said, her voice a velvet melody with a faint, exotic lilt that sent a shiver down his spine. "How's the propulsion system coming along?" Mark straightened, a grin tugging at his lips despite his frustration. "Not great, Lieutenant Commander. These Proxian components are giving me a headache." Nilara glided closer, her eyes scanning the console with a professional's precision. "Let me take a look. I've worked with these systems before." He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Thought you were all about science labs, not greasy engine rooms." Her lips curved into a rare smile, a sight that hit him like a pulse blast. "Now, yes, but I started as an engineer. It's been a while, but I think I can still handle a few calibrations." They set to work, side by side, their movements syncing in a quiet dance. Their hands brushed as they reached for a tool, and Mark felt a spark, her cool skin a stark contrast to his warmth. Nilara's eyes flicked to his, a faint flush darkening her violet cheeks, and for a moment the air between them crackled. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling back, her voice barely audible. "My bad," Mark said, his throat tight, heart pounding like a reactor core. Silence settled, heavy and electric, as they continued. Mark stole glances, captivated by the way her skin caught the light, like moonlight on water, and the subtle scent of her, something floral, alien, intoxicating, lingered in the air. He wondered what it would be like to touch her, to trace the contours of her face, to lose himself in those golden eyes. "So," he said, breaking the tension, "what's it like being a Proxian on a human-heavy station?" Nilara's fingers paused on a dial, her expression softening. "It's different. Your people are passionate, chaotic. Proxians value order, logic, but I've come to appreciate the energy here. Mark nodded, impressed. And we appreciate you. Station wouldn't run half as smooth without you. Her smile returned, warmer this time, and their eyes locked again. Time seemed to slow, her gaze pulling him in like a tractor beam. He felt a pull, not just physical, but something deeper, a connection he couldn't name. An alarm blared, shattering the moment. Nilara's head snapped up, her professional mask sliding back into place. What's that? Mark checked the console. Docking bay. Proxian delegations early. Her face paled, a flicker of fear crossing her features before she hit it. I need to go. They'll expect me. Mark watched her leave, a knot forming in his gut. That fear in her eyes, it wasn't just nerves. Something was off, and he couldn't shake it. That night, unable to sleep, Mark wandered the station's corridors. The night cycle dimmed the lights, casting long shadows. Passing the crew quarters, he heard a soft sound, a rustle, a breath. Curiosity got the better of him, and he glanced through a slightly opened door. There was Nilara, changing out of her uniform. Her back was to him, and that's when he saw it, a geometric pattern etched into her skin, intricate and unnatural, like circuitry woven into flesh. It wasn't a scar. It was too perfect, too deliberate. Nilara turned, catching him. Her eyes widened in panic, and she yanked her uniform closed. What are you doing here? She hissed, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. Mark stammered, backing away. I didn't mean. Get out. She snapped, her composure gone. Mark fled, his mind reeling. What the hell was that? It wasn't just a mark. It was something else, something she was desperate to hide. Back in his quarters, he paced. The image burned into his brain. He accessed the station's database, searching for Proxian physiology, but found nothing on patterns like that. Proxians were secretive, their record sparse. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Maybe it was nothing, but Nilara's terror told him otherwise. A chime at his door jolted him. He opened it to find Nilara, her expression guarded but her eyes haunted. Can I come in? She asked, voice low. Of course, Mark said, stepping aside. She entered, glancing around before facing him. We need to talk about what you saw. Mark nodded, his pulse racing. I'm sorry, Nilara. It was an accident. I didn't mean to spy. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I know, but you can't tell anyone. It's dangerous. What is it? Mark pressed, stepping closer. That pattern, it's not natural, is it? Nilara hesitated, then shook her head. No, it's a Vexus pattern, a control mechanism embedded in my nervous system. It can track me, manipulate me, even kill me. Mark's stomach dropped. Who did this to you? The Proxian military, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was part of a program, enhanced soldiers. I escaped, but they're still hunting me. The delegation, they're here for me. Mark's hands clenched into fists. Why tell me this? Her eyes met his, raw and vulnerable. Because I trust you, Mark, and I need your help. He reached out, taking her hands, her cool skin grounding him. I won't let them take you, Nilara. We'll figure this out. She looked up, tears glistening in her golden eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They stood there, hands clasped, the air thick with unspoken promises. Mark felt a surge of protectiveness, a need to shield her from whatever was coming. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He was in this all the way. As Nilara left, Mark's mind raced. Helping her would be dangerous, maybe deadly. But the thought of her in trouble, of those luminous eyes filled with fear, made his choice clear. This was just the beginning, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Mark Shannon's quarters on Zeta Prime Space Station were a study in controlled chaos. Tools and data pads littered the desk, holographic schematics flickered above a console, and a half-empty mug of coffee sat forgotten, its contents long gone cold. The dim glow of the station's night cycle filtered through the viewport, casting soft shadows across the room. Mark paced, his boots scuffing the metal floor, his mind a whirlwind of questions. The image of Nilara's scar, no, not a scar, a Vexus pattern, burned in his memory. Its geometric precision, like circuitry etched into her violet skin, was unlike anything he'd seen. It wasn't just unnatural, it was deliberate, a mark of something sinister. Her words echoed in his head. They can track me, manipulate me, even kill me. The Proxian military, a secret program, a fugitive. Every piece of the puzzle only deepened the mystery, and Mark wasn't one to let a puzzle go unsolved. He sank in his chair, rubbing his temples. Nilara's trust in him was a weight, heavy but not unwelcome. The way she'd looked at him, her golden eyes raw with fear and hope, had stirred something deep, a need to protect her, to stand between her and whatever hunted her. But to do that, he needed answers. Mark activated his console, the screen flaring to life with a soft hum. Access restricted archives, he muttered, typing in his clearance code. As an engineer with high-level access, he could dig deeper than most, but Proxian data was notoriously guarded. He searched for terms like Vexus pattern, Proxian military programs, and enhanced soldiers, but the results were sparse. A few declassified reports mentioned Proxian biotech advancements, but nothing specific. The Proxians were masters of secrecy, their culture built on discretion and control. He leaned back, frustration gnawing at him. "Come on, give me something," he said to the empty room. The database's silence was deafening, but only fueled his determination. If the official channels were a dead end, he'd try unofficial ones. He opened a secure channel to an old contact from his Earth days, a data broker named Riley, who specialized in off-the-books intel. "Riley, it's Shannon," Mark typed. "Need info on Proxian military programs, specifically anything called Vexus pattern. Discreet. Urgent." He sent the message, knowing it could take hours, maybe days, for a reply. Riley was reliable but slow, and Mark didn't have time to wait. The Proxian delegation was already here, and Nilara's fear suggested they weren't just diplomats. He needed to act fast. Mark stood, stretching his arms, his muscles taut from tension. The station's air felt heavy, charged with the weight of secrets. He glanced at the viewport, where Xerxes' swirling clouds glowed faintly, a reminder of how far he was from home. Earth felt like a lifetime ago, its problems trivial compared to this. Helping Nilara wasn't just a choice. It was a necessity as instinctive as breathing. A soft chime at his door snapped him out of his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat. "Who come this late?" He crossed the room, hesitating before opening the door. Nilara stood there, her violet skin almost luminescent in the corridor's dim light. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. Fear, resolve, and something softer, something that made his chest tighten. "Nilara," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." She entered, her movements fluid but tense, like a predator wary of a trap. She glanced around, as if checking for hidden eyes, then faced him. "I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "But I couldn't stay away." Mark closed the door, the soft click loud in the silence. "I'm glad you came. I've been thinking about you, about what you told me." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she crossed her arms, a defensive gesture. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Mark. It's my burden, not yours." He stepped closer, close enough to catch the faint floral scent of her. Alien, yet intoxicating. "You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm in this because I want to be, because you matter." Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise softening her guarded expression. "You don't even know me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction, as if she wanted to believe him. "I know enough," Mark said, his voice steady. "I know you're scared, but you're strong. I know you trusted me with something huge. That's not nothing." Nilara looked away, her gaze settling on the viewport. "You're too human," she murmured, a hint of a smile in her voice. "Always rushing in, guided by your heart." "Is that a bad thing?" he asked, a grin tugging at his lips. She turned back to him, her smile faint but genuine. "No, it's refreshing." They stood there, the space between them shrinking, the air thick with unspoken tension. Mark's pulse quickened, his body hyper-aware of her scent, her warmth, the way her eyes seemed to see straight through him. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but he held back, sensing she needed space. "Tell me about it," he said gently. "The Vexus pattern. The program. Whatever you're comfortable sharing." Nilara hesitated, then nodded, as if making a decision. She sat on the edge of his desk, her posture rigid. "It started when I was 12, she began, her voice steady but laced with pain. "Proxian society values order, perfection. The military saw potential in me, high aptitude, physical resilience. They took me from my family, said it was an honor." Mark's jaw tightened, anger simmering at the thought of a child torn from home. "That's not an honor. That's theft." She gave a bitter laugh. "Maybe, but I didn't question it then. They trained me, enhanced me." Mark sat alone in his quarters, the silence heavy after Nilara's departure. Her words lingered like a storm cloud. Vexus pattern, military control, a life on the run. He wanted to chase after her, to keep her close, but he knew she needed space. Instead, he poured his energy into planning, his mind racing for ways to shield her from the Proxian delegation. A soft chime broke his thoughts. The door slid open, and Nilara stood there, her violet skin catching the dim light, her golden eyes intense yet vulnerable. "I couldn't stay away," she said, stepping inside, her voice a mix of resolve and hesitation. Mark stood, heart pounding. "I'm glad you're back." She moved closer, her scent, floral, alien, intoxicating, filling the air. "I need you to understand something, Mark. On Proxia, trust is sacred. If we're doing this, I need to know you're all in." He nodded, sensing the weight of her words. "I am. Tell me what you need." Nilara's lips curved into a faint smile. "There's a ritual, share breath. It's how Proxians seal trust. It's intimate, but not what you might think." Mark's pulse quickened, intrigued. "Show me." She stepped closer, their bodies inches apart. "Close your eyes," she whispered. He obeyed, feeling her warmth, her breath cool and steady. "Breathe with me. Match my rhythm." He inhaled, her scent enveloping him, their breaths sinking in a slow, deliberate dance. The world faded, leaving only the rise and fall of their chests, the electric charge between them. Her fingers brushed his, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through him, and he fought the urge to pull her closer. "This is trust," she murmured, her voice a caress. "To share breath is to share life." Mark opened his eyes, finding her gaze locked on his, golden and unguarded. "I trust you, Nilara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Her smile widened, a rare warmth breaking through her reserve. "And I trust you." They stood there, the ritual's intimacy lingering, a bond forged in the quiet of his quarters. Mark knew this was more than a pact. It was a promise, one he'd fight to keep. "We'll face this together," he said, his hand lingering near hers. "No matter what comes." Nilara nodded, her eyes bright with determination. Together. As she left, Mark felt a fire ignite within him. The delegation was a threat, but he was ready. For Nilara, he'd take on the stars themselves. The command center of Zeta Prime Space Station buzzed with controlled chaos as the Proxian delegation shuttle docked. Holographic displays flickered with status updates, and officers moved with practiced efficiency, their voices a low hum against the backdrop of machinery. Mark Shannon stood at the edge of the room, his green eyes scanning the crowd, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm, and he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble had just walked aboard. Nilara's revelation the night before had changed everything. The Vexus pattern etched into her skin wasn't just a scar. It was a leash, a tool of control wielded by the Proxian military. She was a fugitive, hunted for escaping a program that turned children into weapons. And now, with the delegation's early arrival, Mark was certain they weren't here for diplomacy. They were here for her. He adjusted his uniform, trying to blend into the bustle, but his mind was on Nilara. She'd been scarce since their shared breath ritual, a moment that still lingered in his senses. The cool rhythm of her breath, the electric brush of her fingers, the way her golden eyes had softened with trust. That bond, forged in the quiet of his quarters, was now a lifeline. He'd promised to protect her, and he meant it, even if it meant defying a delegation of Proxians. The command center's main screen flared to life, showing the docking bay where the Proxian shuttle had landed. The ramp lowered, and 3 figures emerged, their silhouettes sharp against the bay's harsh lights. Leading them was Ambassador Torin, a tall Proxian with silver-streaked hair and a regal bearing. Behind him were 2 others, Officer Valen, a stern figure with a soldier's posture, and Scientist Mira, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd like a predator. Mira carried a sleek device, its surface glinting with intricate patterns, and Mark's instinct screamed that it was no ordinary tool. Commander Harrington, Zeta Prime's human leader, stepped forward to greet them. Ambassador Torin, welcome to Zeta Prime, he said, his voice warm but formal. We're honored to host you. Torin inclined his head, his smile polite but cold. The honor is ours, Commander. We look forward to strengthening our alliance. Mark watched from the sidelines, his jaw tight. Strengthening the alliance? He didn't buy it. Nilara had said the military was hunting her, and these Proxians had the look of hunters. Valen's gaze swept the room, methodical and unyielding, while Mira's fingers danced over her device, as if calibrating it. Mark had told him that Gadget was trouble, maybe a tracker, maybe something worse. He slipped out of the command center, weaving through corridors toward the science wing where Nilara was stationed. The station's night cycle was over, but the dim lighting and quiet hum of systems gave the halls an eerie feel. His boots echoed softly, each step quickening as his urgency grew. He needed to warn her now. When he reached the science lab, Nilara was alone, bent over a holographic model of a molecular structure. Her violet skin glowed under the lab's soft lights, and her lavender hair was loose, framing her face in a way that made Mark's breath catch. She looked up, her golden eyes widening at his expression. "Mark? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice low, tinged with alarm. He crossed the room, keeping his voice quiet. "The delegation's here. 3 of them, Torin, Valen, and Mira. Mira's got some kind of device, looks like a tracker. I think they're after you." Nilara's face paled, her hands gripping the edge of the console. "Already? I thought we'd have more time." Mark placed a hand on her arm, his touch steadying. "We'll figure this out, but you need to stay out of sight. Can you avoid the command center?" She nodded, but her eyes darted to the door, fear flickering in their depths. "I'll try, but if that device is what I think, it's designed to detect Vexus patterns. It'll find me, Mark, no matter where I hide." His jaw clenched. "Then we need to disable it. Any idea how?" Nilara shook her head, her voice trembling. "Not without getting close, and that's too risky. Valen's trained to spot threats. He'll know something's up." Mark's mind raced, piecing together a plan. "We'll find a way. For now, let's get you somewhere safe." Before she could respond, an alert chimed through the lab speakers. "Lieutenant Commander Nilara, report to the command center immediately." Her eyes widened, panic seizing her features. "They know I'm here." Mark grabbed her hand, his grip firm. "Come with me." Now, they slipped out of the lab, moving swiftly through the corridors. Mark led her toward the maintenance tunnels, a labyrinth of narrow passages used for repairs. The tunnels were a maze, but he knew them like the back of his hand, a perk of being the station's top engineer. They ducked into a side passage just as footsteps echoed behind them, sharp and purposeful. Inside the tunnel, the air was cool and stale, the walls lined with conduits and blinking lights. The space was tight, forcing them close, their bodies brushing as they crouched behind panel. Mark's heart pounded, not just from the danger, but from Nilara's proximity. Her scent, floral, alien, intoxicating, filled the confined space, and her warmth pressed against him, her breath quick and shallow. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his lips close to her ear. She nodded, her golden eyes locked on his, wide with fear but steady with trust. Their faces were inches apart, and in the dim glow of the tunnel's emergency lights, Mark saw every detail of her. The curve of her lips, the faint flush on her violet cheeks, the way her hair caught the light like spun lavender. He wanted to pull her close, to shield her with his body, but he forced himself to focus. The footsteps grew louder, pausing just outside the tunnel entrance. A low voice, Valen's, cut through the silence. Check the labs again. She can't have gone far. Mark's hand tightened on Nilara's, his thumb brushing her skin in a silent promise. She squeezed back, her touch grounding him. They waited, barely breathing, until the footsteps faded. They're gone, Mark whispered, but he didn't move, reluctant to break their closeness. Nilara's eyes searched his, her voice a hushed murmur. You didn't have to do this, Mark. Risking yourself for me. He leaned closer, their foreheads nearly touching. I told you, I'm in this. You're worth it. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the danger faded, leaving only the electric pull between them. Mark felt it again, that magnetic force, urging him to close the distance, to taste the cool sweetness of her lips. Her eyes fluttered, as if she felt it too, and her hand lingered in his, her fingers tracing his palm in a way that sent heat coursing through him. We can't stay here, she said, her voice unsteady, breaking the spell. Mark nodded, forcing himself to pull back. Right. There's a maintenance hub deeper in. It's secure off the grid. We can regroup there. They moved deeper into the tunnel, their steps quiet but urgent. Mark led the way, his mind split between the threat and the woman beside him. Her presence was a constant distraction, her scent and warmth a reminder of what he was fighting for. He didn't know what the delegation's device was capable of, but he'd be damned if he let it find her. As they reached the hub, a small, cluttered space filled with tools and monitors, Mark sealed the hatch behind them. We're safe for now, he said, turning to her. But we need a plan to deal with that device. Nilara nodded, her expression grim. If it's a tracker, it's locked onto my pattern. We need to disrupt its signal, but that means getting close to Mira. Mark's jaw tightened. Then that's what we'll do. But we need help, someone we could trust. She looked at him, her eyes softening. We have each other. That's a start. Mark smiled, a surge of determination washing over him. Damn right it is. They stood there, the hub's dim lights casting shadows across their faces, the weight of their situation pressing down. But in that moment, Mark felt invincible, fueled by the bond they'd forged and the fire in Nilara's eyes. The hunters were closing in, but he'd fight with everything he had to keep her safe. The maintenance hub was a cramped sanctuary, its walls lined with blinking consoles and tangled cables, the air thick with a metallic tang of machinery. Mark Shannon crouched beside Nilara, their shoulders brushing in the tight space. Her floral sent a fleeting comfort amidst the tension. The dim emergency lights cast her violet skin in a soft glow, and her golden eyes, though sharp with worry, held a quiet strength that steadied him. They'd escaped the Proxian delegation's immediate grasp, but Mark knew the danger was far from over. We can't stay here long, Nilara whispered, her voice low, her breath warm against his ear. If Mira's device is a tracker, it'll pinpoint my Vex's pattern eventually. Mark nodded, his jaw tight. Then we need to move fast. But we can't do this alone. We need someone with access to the delegation's tech, someone who can get us close to that device. Nilara's eyes flickered with doubt. Who can we trust? The delegation's presence changes everything. People will be watching. Mark's mind raced, sifting through the station's roster. Commander Harrington was a possibility. His authority could open doors, but he was too visible, too tied to protocol. Then a name clicked. Rachel Harper, a human scientist in the biotech lab. Rachel was brilliant, discreet, and had worked with Proxian tech before. She'd always been friendly with Mark, even flirty at times, and he'd sensed she'd be willing to bend rules for the right cause. Rachel Harper, he said, meeting Nilara's gaze. She's in biotech, knows Proxian systems. If anyone can help us analyze Mira's device, it's her. Nilara hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. A human? Are you sure she's safe? She's solid. Mark assured her, though a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. I'll talk to her, feel her out. If she's not on board, we'll find another way. Nilara nodded, but her eyes lingered on his, a silent plea for caution. Be careful, Mark. We're playing a dangerous game. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through him. I will. Stay here, keep the hatch locked. I'll be back soon. Leaving her felt like tearing himself in two, but Mark forced his focus to the task. He slipped out of the hub, navigating the maintenance tunnels until he emerged in a quiet corridor near the biotech lab. The station was alive with activity, crew members bustling to accommodate the delegation, but Mark kept to the shadows, his senses on high alert. The biotech lab was a sterile maze of glowing monitors and humming equipment. Rachel Harper stood at a workstation, her auburn hair pulled back, her sharp features illuminated by a holographic display. She was in her late 20s, with a reputation for ambition and a knack for Proxian biotech. When she saw Mark, her lips curved into a sly smile. "Mark Shannon," she said, her tone teasing. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He forced a grin, keeping his voice casual. "Need your expertise, Rachel. Got a minute?" She raised an eyebrow, setting down a datapad. "For you? Always." Mark glanced around, ensuring they were alone, then lowered his voice. "It's about the Proxian delegation. They brought a device, some kind of tracker. I need to know what it does, maybe how to disrupt it." Rachel's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "That's a tall order. Why do you care?" "Let's just say it's important," Mark said, holding her gaze. "Can you help?" She studied him, then nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can dig up, but I need specifics. What kind of device?" Before he could answer, a comm unit on her desk chirped. She glanced at it, her expression tightening, then tapped it off. "Give me a few hours," she said, her tone brisk. "I'll contact you." Mark nodded, but something in her demeanor, too quick, too guarded, set his instincts on edge. "Thanks, Rachel. I owe you." As he left the lab, he couldn't shake the feeling he'd missed something. Rachel had always been sharp, but her reaction felt off, like she was hiding more than she let on. He needed to know more, and fast. Instead of returning to Nilara, Mark detoured to a service alcove near the command center, where he could access a secondary console without drawing attention. Using his engineering clearance, he tapped into the station's security feeds, pulling up footage of the docking bay. He rewound to the delegation's arrival, watching closely. There in the corner of the frame was Rachel, standing off to the side, her eyes fixed on Mira's device. She was too far to hear, but her posture, tense, focused, suggested more than casual curiosity. Then, as Valen passed, Rachel gave a subtle nod, almost imperceptible. Mark's blood ran cold. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal. He switched feeds, tracking Rachel's movements. Hours earlier, she'd been in a restricted comms room, one used for encrypted transmissions. The maintenance hub was a cramped sanctuary, its walls lined with blinking consoles and tangled cables, the air thick with a metallic tang of machinery. Mark Shannon crouched beside Nilara, their shoulders brushing in the tight space. Her floral sent a fleeting comfort amidst the tension. The dim emergency lights cast her violet skin in a soft glow, and her golden eyes, though sharp with worry, held a quiet strength that steadied him. They'd escaped the Proxian delegation's immediate grasp, but Mark knew the danger was far from over. "We can't stay here long," Nilara whispered, her voice low, her breath warm against his ear. "If Mira's device is a tracker, it'll pinpoint my Vex's pattern eventually." Mark nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we need to move fast. But we can't do this alone. We need someone with access to the delegation's tech, someone who can get us close to that device." Nilara's eyes flickered with doubt. "Who can we trust? The delegation's presence changes everything. People will be watching." Mark's mind raced, sifting through the station's roster. Commander Harrington was a possibility. His authority could open doors, but he was too visible, too tied to protocol. Then a name clicked. Rachel Harper, a human scientist in the biotech lab. Rachel was brilliant, discreet, and had worked with Proxian tech before. She'd always been friendly with Mark, even flirty at times, and he'd sensed she'd be willing to bend rules for the right cause. "Rachel Harper," he said, meeting Nilara's gaze. "She's in biotech, knows Proxian systems. If anyone can help us analyze Mira's device, it's her." Nilara hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "A human? Are you sure she's safe?" "She's solid," Mark assured her, though a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. I'll talk to her, feel her out. If she's not on board, we'll find another way. Nilara nodded, but her eyes lingered on his, a silent plea for caution. Be careful, Mark. We're playing a dangerous game. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through him. I will. Stay here, keep the hatch locked. I'll be back soon. Leaving her felt like tearing himself in two, but Mark forced his focus to the task. He slipped out of the hub, navigating the maintenance tunnels until he emerged in a quiet corridor near the biotech lab. The station was alive with activity, crew members bustling to accommodate the delegation, but Mark kept to the shadows, his senses on high alert. The biotech lab was a sterile maze of glowing monitors and humming equipment. Rachel Harper stood at a workstation, her auburn hair pulled back, her sharp features illuminated by a holographic display. She was in her late 20s, with a reputation for ambition and a knack for Proxian biotech. When she saw Mark, her lips curved into a sly smile. Mark Shannon, she said, her tone teasing. To what do I owe the pleasure? He forced a grin, keeping his voice casual. Need your expertise, Rachel. Got a minute? She raised an eyebrow, setting down a datapad. For you? Always. Mark glanced around, ensuring they were alone, then lowered his voice. It's about the Proxian delegation. They brought a device, some kind of tracker. I need to know what it does, maybe how to disrupt it. Rachel's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. That's a tall order. Why do you care? Let's just say it's important, Mark said, holding her gaze. Can you help? She studied him, then nodded slowly. I'll see what I can dig up, but I need specifics. What kind of device? Before he could answer, a comm unit on her desk chirped. She glanced at it, her expression tightening, then tapped it off. Give me a few hours, she said, her tone brisk. I'll contact you. Mark nodded, but something in her demeanor, too quick, too guarded, set his instincts on edge. Thanks, Rachel. I owe you. As he left the lab, he couldn't shake the feeling he'd missed something. Rachel had always been sharp, but her reaction fell off, like she was hiding more than she let on. He needed to know more, and fast. Instead of returning to Nilara, Mark detoured to a service alcove near the command center, where he could access a secondary console without drawing attention. Using his engineering clearance, he tapped into the station's security feeds, pulling up footage of the docking bay. He rewound to the delegation's arrival, watching closely. There in the corner of the frame was Rachel, standing off to the side, her eyes fixed on Mira's device. She was too far to hear, but her posture, tense, focused, suggested more than casual curiosity. Then, as Valen passed, Rachel gave a subtle nod, almost imperceptible. Mark's blood ran cold. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal. He switched feeds, tracking Rachel's movements. Hours earlier, she'd been in a restricted comms room, one used for encrypted transmissions. Mark didn't have access to the logs, but the timing was damning, right before the delegation's early arrival. Damn it, he muttered, his fists clenching. Rachel was working with them, or at least feeding them information. He'd walked right into a trap, and worse, he put Nilara at risk by mentioning the device. Mark's mind raced. He needed to warn Nilara, but going back now could lead Rachel, or Valen, straight to her. He had to be smart, play this like the engineer he was, calculate, adapt, overcome. He sent a coded message to Nilara's personal comm, a trick they'd set up during their late-night talks. Stay put. Trust no one. I'm handling it. He hoped she'd see it before it was too late. As he slipped back into the corridors, Mark's resolve hardened. Rachel's betrayal was a blow, but it only clarified the stakes. The conspiracy was bigger than he'd thought, and Nilara was at its center. He'd find a way to protect her, even if it meant taking on the delegation, and Rachel, head-on. The maintenance hub on Zeta Prime Space Station was a claustrophobic cocoon of flickering monitors and humming conduits, a temporary refuge for Mark Shannon and Nilara. The air was thick with the scent of metal and ozone, but Mark's focus was on Nilara, her violet skin glowing faintly in the dim light, her golden eyes sharp with determination despite the fear lurking beneath. They'd evaded the Proxian delegation's initial sweep, but Rachel Harper's betrayal had upped the stakes. The scientist nodded to Valen, her presence in the encrypted comms room. It all pointed to a conspiracy that reached beyond the Proxians, and Nilara was the prize. Mark crouched beside her, their knees brushing in the tight space. Her florals sent a quiet anchor in the chaos. "Rachel's working with them," he said, his voice low, urgency threading through it. "She's feeding them intel, maybe even help them get here early. We can't trust anyone else." Nilara's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of a console. "Then we're on our own. Mira's device, it's a pattern tracker. If we don't disable it, they'll find me. And when they do, they won't." Mark cut in, his hand finding hers, his grip firm. Her cool skin sent a spark through him, grounding his resolve. "We'll stop it, but we need a plan, and we need it now." Her eyes met his, a flicker of trust softening her fear. "What are you thinking?" Mark's mind churned, piecing together their options. The tracker was with Mira, likely in the delegation's secure quarters, guarded by Valen and possibly Rachel. Going in blind was suicide, but there was one person who might tip the scales. Commander Harrington, Zeta Prime's human leader. Harrington was a hardliner, but Mark had seen flashes of compassion in him, especially when it came to protecting his crew. If Mark could convince him, they'd have the authority and resources to act. "Harrington," Mark said, "he's got the clearance to get us into the delegation's quarters. If we can make him see the truth about the Vexus pattern, he'll back us." Nilara's brow furrowed. "He's a by-the-book type. Why would he risk helping a fugitive?" Mark's lips curved into a grim smile. "Because he's human, and I'm betting he doesn't like being played by Proxians or traitors like Rachel." She hesitated, then nodded. "It's a long shot, but it's all we've got. How do we get to him without being seen?" Mark glanced at the hub's monitor, pulling up a map of the station service tunnels. "These tunnels connect to the command deck. We can move unseen, but it'll be tight." "Ready?" Her hand squeezed his, a silent affirmation. "Ready." They slipped into the tunnels, navigating a maze of narrow passages lit by flickering emergency lights. The confined space forced them close, their bodies brushing with each step, and Mark felt the heat of her presence despite her cool skin. Her scent enveloped him, and her steady breaths synced with his, a reminder of their shared breath ritual. It was a distraction he couldn't afford, but one he didn't want to shake. The tunnels were a labyrinth, but Mark's years as an engineer gave him an edge. He led them through twists and turns, avoiding patrol routes, until they reached a hidden access panel near the command deck. He pried it open, revealing a service alcove just outside Harrington's office. The corridor beyond was quiet, but Mark's instincts screamed caution. "Wait here," he whispered, his lips close to Nilara's ear. "I'll talk to Harrington. If anything goes wrong, head back to the hub." Her eyes flashed with defiance. "I'm not leaving you." He grinned, despite the tension. "Stubborn. I like it. Just stay low." Mark slipped into the corridor, his heart pounding as he approached Harrington's office. The door was ajar, and he knocked softly, stepping inside. Harrington, a grizzled man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard, looked up from a data pad, his expression stern. "Shannon," he said, leaning back. "This better be good. I'm up to my neck with the delegation." Mark closed the door, lowering his voice. "It's about the Proxians, sir. They're not here for diplomacy. They're hunting one of our own, Lieutenant Commander Nilara." Harrington's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation." "Evidence." Mark took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Nilara's a fugitive from a Proxian military program. They embedded a control device in her, a Vexus pattern. The delegation's got a tracker, and they're closing in. I think Rachel Harper's helping them." Harrington's face darkened. "Harper? That's a bold claim. Why should I believe you?" Mark met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I've seen the patterns, sir, and because I know you don't tolerate threats to this station. Nilara's one of us. We can't let them take her." Harrington studied him, then leaned forward, his voice low. "My daughter was in a Proxian exchange program years ago. She came back, different. I've suspected their military's been hiding something. If you're right, I want proof." Mark seized the opening. "Let me get it. I need access to the delegation's quarters to disable the tracker." Covertly, Harrington hesitated, then nodded. "You've got one shot, Shannon. Don't screw it up. I'll keep the delegation occupied. Move fast. Mark saluted, relief flooding him. Thank you, sir. He returned to the alcove, finding Nilara waiting, her eyes searching his. Well, Harrington's in, Mark said, a grin breaking through. He's giving us a window. We're going for the tracker. Her relief was palpable, but her voice stayed firm. Where? Their quarters. It's our best bet to find Mira's device. But it's guarded, and Rachel might be there. Nilara's expression hardened. Then we'll be ready. They moved through the tunnels again, this time toward the VIP quarters in the station's secure wing. The passages grew colder, the hum of systems louder, and Mark's senses were on high alert. Nilara's presence beside him was a steadying force, her quiet strength fueling his own. Their hands brushed as they navigated a narrow section, and he caught her glance, a flicker of warmth in her eyes that made his pulse race. At the tunnel's end, they reached a vent overlooking the delegation's quarters. Through the slats, Mark saw a spacious suite, its walls lined with Proxian tech, glowing panels, intricate devices. Mira's tracker sat on a table, its surface pulsing faintly, unguarded for now. Valen and Rachel were nowhere in sight, but Mark knew that could change fast. He pried open the vent, dropping silently into the room, Nilara following with cat-like grace. The suite was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the tracker. Mark approached it, his engineering instincts kicking in. The device was sleek, its interface alien, but not impenetrable. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt, working quickly to access its core. Nilara stood watch, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the door. Hurry, she whispered, her voice tight. I'm trying, Mark muttered, sweat beading on his brow. The tracker's code was complex, but he recognized patterns from Proxian systems he'd studied. If he could overload its signal, it might buy them time. A soft click at the door froze them both. Mark grabbed Nilara, pulling her behind a console, just as the door slid open. Valen stepped inside, his cold eyes sweeping the room, Rachel at his side. Her auburn hair glinted, her expression smug. They're close, Rachel said, her voice low. The tracker's picking up a signal. Mark's blood boiled. Rachel's betrayal was no surprise, but seeing her with Valen confirmed it. He tightened his grip on Nilara's hand, her cool fingers steadying him. They were trapped, but he wasn't out of moves yet. The Proxian delegation's quarters on Zeta Prime Space Station were a fortress of alien technology, their glowing panels casting an eerie light across the room. Mark Shannon and Nilara crouched behind a console, their bodies pressed close, hearts pounding as Valen and Rachel Harper stood mere feet away. The air was thick with tension, the hum of Mira's tracking device a constant reminder of the danger. Mark's hand gripped Nilara's, her cool skin a lifeline in the chaos, her floral scent grounding him even as his pulse raced. They'd been caught mid-infiltration, and now their only hope was to outsmart a Proxian soldier and a traitor. Valen's voice cut through the silence, cold and precise. The signal's strong. She's here. His violet eyes scanned the room, his hand resting on a sleek weapon at his hip. Rachel stood beside him, her auburn hair catching the light, her smirk betraying her betrayal. Mark's mind raced, calculating their odds. The tracker sat on the table, its pulsing surface taunting them. He'd been seconds from disabling it when Valen entered, and now their window was closing. Nilara's breath was shallow, her golden eyes locked on his, a mix of fear and defiance that fueled his resolve. They couldn't fight Valen head-on. He was trained, armed, and ruthless, but they could outmaneuver him. Stay low, Mark whispered, his lips brushing her ear, sending a shiver through him despite the danger. She nodded, her fingers tightening in his, a silent vow to follow his lead. Mark scanned the room, spotting a maintenance panel on the wall behind them. If he could reach it, he could trigger a system overload, maybe create a distraction. But it meant leaving Nilara exposed, and the thought twisted his gut. He met her gaze, a question in his eyes. She gave a slight nod, her trust absolute, and his heart swelled with a fierce need to protect her. On my signal, he mouthed, then shifted, ready to move. Rachel's voice broke the moment. Check the consoles, Valen. They're not stupid enough to stay in the open. Valen stepped forward, his boots echoing on the metal floor, closing in on their hiding spot. Mark's muscles tensed, his multi-tool clutched in his free hand. He had one shot. He waited until Valen was within arm's reach, then lunged, slamming the tool into the maintenance panel's lock. Sparks flew, and the room's lights flickered as a power surge triggered alarms. Valen spun, weapon drawn, but Nilara was faster. She sprang from their hiding spot, her Proxian reflexes a blur, tackling Rachel to the ground. The scientist gasped, her data pad clattering across the floor. Mark dove for the tracker, his fingers flying over its interface, inputting the override code he'd memorized. "Stop them!" Valen roared, firing a pulse blast that scorched the wall above Mark's head. Nilara rolled, pinning Rachel, her strength surprising for her lithe frame. "Stay down," she hissed, her voice a low growl. Rachel struggled, but Nilara's grip was iron. Mark's hands shook as he worked, the tracker's code resisting his efforts. The device was a masterpiece of Proxian tech, but Mark was no slouch. He rerouted its power core, forcing a feedback loop. The tracker's pulse quickened, then stuttered, its light dimming as the signal collapsed. "Got it!" Mark shouted, just as Valen charged. Nilara released Rachel, dodging Valen's grasp with fluid grace. Mark grabbed a loose conduit from the panel, swinging it like a club, catching Valen's arm. The Proxian grunted, his weapon skittering across the floor. Mark tackled him, the two men crashing into a console, sparks raining around them. Nilara seized the moment, grabbing the tracker and smashing it against the table. The device sparked and died, its hum fading into silence. "It's done," she called, her voice triumphant. Valen shoved Mark off, his strength unnatural, but Mark was ready. He kicked Valen's knee, sending him staggering, then scrambled to Nilara's side. Rachel, dazed, was crawling toward the door, but Nilara blocked her path, her eyes blazing. "You're finished, Harper," Nilara said, her tone icy. Before Rachel could respond, the door hissed open, and Commander Harrington stormed in, flanked by two security officers. "Stand down," he barked, his pistol trained on Valen. Valen froze, his eyes narrowing, but he raised his hands. Rachel slumped, her defiance crumbling under Harrington's glare. "Cuff them," Harrington ordered, his voice steel. The officers moved swiftly, securing Valen and Rachel. Mark exhaled, his body aching from the fight, but relief flooded him. Nilara stood beside him, her breathing heavy, her violet skin flushed with exertion. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. They'd done it. Harrington approached, his expression grim but approving. "You two all right?" "Yes, sir," Mark said, wiping blood from a cut on his lip. "The tracker's dead. Nilara's safe." Harrington glanced at Nilara, his gaze softening. "You've got a hell of a story, Lieutenant Commander. We'll need to talk, but for now, you're under my protection." Nilara nodded, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Commander." As security escorted Valen and Rachel out, Harrington turned to Mark. "Good work, Shannon. But this isn't over. Torrent's still out there, and he won't take this lightly." Mark nodded, his jaw tight. "Understood, sir." Harrington left, and the room fell quiet. The wreckage of their fight a stark reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. Mark turned to Nilara, his heart still racing. "You okay?" She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, her touch cool and electric. "Thanks to you," she said, her voice soft, her golden eyes searching his. The air between them thickened, charged with the adrenaline of survival and something deeper. Mark's gaze dropped to her lips, full and inviting, and he felt that magnetic pull again, stronger than ever. "Nilara," he murmured, his voice rough. "I thought I'd lost you back there." She smiled, a rare, unguarded warmth that lit up her face. "You didn't, and you won't." He couldn't hold back anymore. He pulled her close, his hands framing her face, and kissed her. Her lips were cool, soft, yielding to his with a hunger that matched his own. The kiss deepened, a release of fear and longing, their bodies pressed together in the quiet wreckage of the room. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her scent enveloping him, and for a moment, the galaxy faded away. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together. "We shouldn't," Nilara whispered, but her eyes sparkled with defiance, her hand still on his chest. "Screw shouldn't," Mark said, grinning. "We're alive. That's what matters." She laughed, a sound that warmed him to his core and pulled him back into her embrace. The room's dim lights bathed them in a soft glow, and as they sank to the floor, the world narrowed to just them. Their touches were urgent yet tender, a dance of trust and desire, their connection transcending words. In that stolen moment, they found solace, a promise of something more, sealed in the heat of their shared victory. As they lay there, tangled in each other's arms, Mark knew this was more than a fleeting escape. It was a beginning, a bond that could create life, a future they'd fight for, no matter the cost. The command center of Zeta Prime Space Station was a hive of activity, its holographic displays casting a kaleidoscope of light across the faces of officers and diplomats. The air hummed with the low buzz of consoles and the weight of history in the making. Mark Shannon stood at the edge of the room, his broad shoulders squared, his green eyes fixed on Nilara, who stood at the center of it all. Her violet skin shimmered under the artificial lights, her lavender hair cascading over her shoulders, and her golden eyes held a quiet strength that made his chest ache with pride. Today was her day, and he'd never been prouder to stand by her side. 2 weeks had passed since their confrontation with Valen and Rachel Harper. The fallout had been swift and seismic. Commander Harrington, armed with evidence of the Proxian military's secret program, had rallied the station's leadership to confront Ambassador Torrin. The ambassador, caught off guard by the disabled tracker and Valen's arrest, had no choice but to cooperate. Rachel, exposed as a traitor, faced charges, her ambitions crumbling under the weight of her betrayal. The Vexus pattern, once a tool of control, was now a symbol of Nilara's defiance, its secrets laid bare for the galaxy to judge. The Interstellar Alliance, summoned to Zeta Prime, had acted decisively. A tribunal reviewed Nilara's case, her testimony, delivered with unflinching courage, detailing the horrors of the Proxian enhancement program. Mark had sat in the gallery, his fists clenched, as she recounted her childhood abduction, the implantation of the Vexus pattern, and her desperate escape. Her voice never wavered, but he saw the toll it took, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. He'd wanted to pull her into his arms, to shield her from the pain, but she'd stood tall, a warrior in every sense. The tribunal's verdict came swiftly. Nilara was granted asylum and full citizenship in the Alliance, her status as a fugitive erased. The Proxians, under pressure, agreed to dismantle their enhancement program, though Mark doubted they'd comply fully. For now, though, Nilara was free, truly free, for the first time in her life. Today's ceremony was the culmination of that victory. Nilara stood before a panel of Alliance officials, her uniform replaced by a simple silver tunic that clung to her lithe frame, accentuating her otherworldly beauty. Mark's breath caught as she stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. He'd seen her in battle, in fear, in passion, but this was Nilara unbound, a woman claiming her place in the stars. Admiral Kwan, a human with a stern face softened by compassion, addressed the assembly. "Lieutenant Commander Nilara, your courage has exposed a grave injustice and strengthened our alliance. On behalf of the Interstellar Alliance, I grant you full citizenship, with all rights and protections. Welcome home." The room erupted in applause, human and Proxian voices mingling in a rare moment of unity. Nilara bowed her head, her eyes glistening, and Mark felt a lump in his throat. He clapped harder than anyone, his grin wide enough to hurt. She'd fought for this, bled for it, and now it was hers. As the ceremony ended, Nilara wove through the crowd, her gaze seeking Mark's. When their eyes met, the noise faded, the world narrowing to just them. She reached him, her smile radiant, and he pulled her into a hug, heedless of the onlookers. Her body was warm against his, her floral scent enveloping him, and he buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. "You did it," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're free." She pulled back, her golden eyes shining. "We did it, Mark. I couldn't have gotten here without you." He grinned, his hand lingering on her arm, his thumb brushing her cool skin. "Don't sell yourself short. You're a force of nature." Her laugh was soft, a melody that warmed him to his core. "Come on," she said, tugging his hand. "Let's get out of here." They slipped away from the command center, navigating Zeta Prime's corridors with the ease of partners who'd faced death together. The station was alive with celebration, crew members toasting the tribunal's outcome, but Mark and Nilara craved quiet. They headed to Mark's quarters, a sanctuary amidst the chaos, where they could finally breathe. The door hissed shut behind them, sealing out the world. Mark's quarters were familiar chaos, tools scattered, a flickering schematic on the console, but the dim lighting and soft hum of the station gave it a cozy intimacy. Nilara stood by the viewport, gazing at Xerxes' swirling clouds, her silhouette of vision against the starlight. Mark watched her, his heart swelling with a mix of awe and desire. She was here, safe, his. He crossed the room, standing behind her, close enough to feel her warmth. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice low. She turned, her golden eyes meeting his, a depth of emotion swirling within them. "About how far I've come. About you." His breath hitched, and he stepped closer, their bodies inches apart. "Yeah? Good things, I hope." Her lips curved, a teasing glint in her eyes. "Very good things." The air between them crackled, charged with the weight of their shared journey. Mark's hand rose, brushing a strand of lavender hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Her skin was cool, smooth as silk, and he felt the pulse of her heartbeat beneath his touch. "Nilara," he said, his voice rough, "you have no idea what you do to me." Her eyes darkened, a flicker of desire mirroring his own. "I think I do," she whispered, her voice a velvet caress. He couldn't hold back anymore. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tender and urgent, a release of all they'd endured. Her lips were soft, cool, yielding to his with a hunger that set his blood on fire. She pressed closer, her hands sliding up his chest, fingers curling into his uniform as the kiss deepened. The world melted away, leaving only the heat of their connection, the rhythm of their breaths. Mark's hands roamed, tracing the curve of her back, careful not to press where the Vexus pattern lay, a reminder of her past, now powerless. She shivered under his touch, a soft sigh escaping her, and he pulled back just enough to meet her gaze. Her eyes were molten gold, filled with trust and something deeper, something that made his heart pound. "We've got all the time in the world now," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. She smiled, her fingers brushing his jaw. "Then let's make it count." They moved to the bed, the station's hum a distant lullaby. The dim light bathed them in a soft glow, and as they sank into each other's arms, their touches were a language of their own, gentle, fervent, a celebration of survival and love. Her violet skin was a canvas under his fingers, her scent enveloping him, and every brush of her lips was a promise. They shed their fears, their doubts, finding solace in the quiet intimacy of the moment. It was a dance of trust, of passion, a silent vow that this was only the beginning. As they lay tangled together, the stars outside gleaming through the viewport, Mark felt a profound peace. Nilara's head rested on his chest, her breathing steady, and he traced lazy patterns on her arm, savoring the weight of her against him. They'd fought for this, for each other, and now, in the stillness, they were whole. The soft hum of Zeta Prime Space Station enveloped Mark Shannon's quarters, where he and Nilara lay intertwined, the afterglow of their intimacy lingering like starlight. Her violet skin glowed faintly against his, her lavender hair splayed across the pillow, and her golden eyes held a quiet intensity. Mark traced a gentle path along her arm, his heart full, the weight of their shared victory anchoring them in this moment. Nilara shifted, propping herself on an elbow, her gaze searching his. "Mark," she said, her voice soft but charged with something new. "There's something I need to tell you." He raised an eyebrow, a playful grin tugging at his lips. "More secrets? I thought we were past that." Her smile was tentative, almost shy, a rare vulnerability that made his pulse quicken. "Not a secret. A possibility. I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a pulse blast, stealing his breath. His grin faded, replaced by awe. "Pregnant? You're sure?" She nodded, her hand resting on her stomach, a gesture both protective and proud. "Proxian human compatibility is rare, but it happens. I felt it this morning, our bond, our night together. It's real." Mark's heart swelled, a rush of joy and responsibility flooding him. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cool skin grounding his whirlwind of emotions. "A kid," he murmured, half to himself. "Our kid." Nilara laughed, a melody that warmed the room. "Our kid," she echoed, her eyes sparkling. They sat up, hands clasped, the stars outside the viewport a canvas of possibility. "What should we name them?" Mark asked, his voice thick with emotion. Nilara's gaze drifted to the stars, her expression thoughtful. "Ethon. It means light in Proxian, hope in your tongue. A name for both our worlds." "Ethon," Mark repeated, the word feeling right like a promise. "Perfect." They stood, drawn to the viewport, their reflections mingling with the cosmos. Mark wrapped an arm around her, her warmth a beacon in the vastness. "We'll make a life for Ethon," he said, his voice steady. "A good one, free from fear." Nilara leaned into him, her hand over his. "Together," she said, her voice a vow. As they gazed at the stars, the galaxy stretched before them, infinite and unyielding. But in their shared breath, their shared hope, Mark and Nilara found their own universe, one where love, courage, and Ethon would light the way.